All right, everybody. Well, good morning. For anyone who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Claire Barrett. I'm the archives manager for Mayher Archive Collective. And today we have an interview with Owen Cooper, author of Young Love. Very beautiful book. If you haven't read it yet, highly recommend it. And Owen wanted to start off this interview talking a little bit about his book and reading a passage from it, if that was still what you wanted to do.
Yes, of course. Thank
All
you.
right, wonderful.
Um, I wanted to start with what might be my favorite passage in the whole book, and it's an encounter I had with Kitty. Um, and before I start, when I wrote the book, I had trouble sort of getting into my piece on Kitty. And then a friend of mine, who some of you might know, named Rob Tamara, who's a composer and an orchestra conductor and a very fine musician, gave me some insight into Kitty's musical background. And I remember once I went to a concert of the Nutcracker at Christmas, and we had not very expensive tickets because they were way on the side and we could barely see the stage, but we had a perfect view of the orchestra. And rather than watching the ballet, I was watching the orchestra the whole time. And the conductor was fascinated by the conductor because there was all this pretty music, all these wonderful things that the audience was enjoying, and the conductor was total business, and he would go in an instant from one thing to the other, and he never missed a beat. And this was like 45 minutes or an hour, and I thought that's Kitty with her musical training. Her piano teacher was one of the foremost piano teachers. His name was Gustav Holt, who was a composer. He wanted to be a pianist, but he got bursitis. He was her music teacher. She was not an ordinary musician by any means. And I go in that in a little more detail in the book. But when I read the passage, I'm going to make some references to the performer, which would be Kitty, following the composer's intent, which meant, so that refers to Mayor Bob as the composer and Kitty as the performer. So I thought it might uh, be a little more understandable. I think I need to lower this shade a little bit because the sun is there. It's a little better. So now I'll read the book. I was a salesman at Sherry Press for a number of years. So um, each morning at Sherry Press, I planned my route for the day of deliveries by picking up new orders. Then I usually headed south past the Baba Center into Myrtle Beach. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't overcome a tendency to forget things. One day, deeply disturbed because I had forgotten some essential item, my first stop was at Dill River, where Kitty lived and worked. Seeing that I was troubled, Kitty asked me how I was. I told her about my difficulties with remembering details. Sensing my genuine distress, she offered no tips on how to improve my memory. I had already received lots of those. Instead, with the mastery of a musical artist joining the composer's intent, she slowed her quick tempo and led me into the living room away from the phone where we sat down together. There she told me how in India, Baba had assigned Rano Gailey to keep the medicines. Rana was the best with details. Then she said that this may have been the reason Baba selected Rano to live permanently with him. It was so poignant. I wasn't alone in this. Kitty shared the same struggles, the same heartfelt longings. Thus did this master performer of the divine song soothe a troubled child. From this encounter, I learned that in those painful moments, when we believe we cannot overcome our weaknesses, Baba longs to console us. We always have access to his comforting love. He is our mother as well as our father. Once at a gathering, I spontaneously initiated a homie handshake with Kitty. A homie is a handshake like this. A homie is a gesture of solidarity that originated, I believe, with African American soldiers in Vietnam. It pulls together, affirming unity and closeness. Kitty got the idea as if we shook hands like this all the time. Her twinkling eyes said, "Yes, exactly." The next instant, her friendly smile turned to lighten the day of another good friend.
You have such a way with words. You really do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alrighty. So let's start off with, I suppose, the most important question. Was there anything in particular that prompted you to write your personal stories of those early days?
Well, it really started. I mean, I felt an obligation to do this generally, but and I introduced my book with this encounter that I had in the refectory with a young person who had never met any of the Mandalay and had never, wasn't there during those golden years that everyone talks about. And she said, "Well, what about us? What about me? I didn't meet these people. What am I supposed to do? And that kind of a question." And I didn't have an answer for her, but I thought it was a very good question. I certainly didn't have any sense that it was because I deserved it more than her or anything. But I thought about that question for many years. I mean, like 2 decades. Like the question would come to my mind: why? What can I say that would make her feel better and help her understand? And so that was uh, and I addressed the book to her. When I was writing the book, I was writing it to that one person whose name I never got. I never was introduced to her. But I was thinking of her the whole time when I wrote the book.
Well, yeah, in the beginning, letter to a friend whose name I do not know. That
Yeah.
is some. Next question. What was your self-publishing process like? Anyone in the audience who might be interested in getting a book published this way, better get out your notepads right now. So tell
Well,
us a little bit.
it was quite a process. I worked on it. It took about 2 years to
Oh,
put the book together. Um, I first, of course, I had to write the book, but then the self-publishing part, I had a number of photos. When I wrote the book, I began to understand that so much of what I was trying to say could be enhanced by photos, as well as some links to some talks, especially by Darwin Shaw, that are in the book. Um, and so I wanted to get the best printer I could find.
mhm.
And I read about a printer named Blurb, which specializes in art books. And so I used Blurb. I think my wife Dot used Blurb with her book also. And so I had to, and there was a lot of tweaking back and forth to get the book right. The spine, for example, was off like maybe a fraction of an inch, if you can see it. But anyway, the spine was off a tiny bit, and the Blurb would reprint it for free. They were very nice about it. They were very easy to work with, although it was all with email in order to keep the prices down. But then, so I found that the right printer for the book. And then there was the question of editing, no one ever does anything alone. If you try to write a book all by yourself, you're missing out on all kinds of opportunities to make it better. Um, I had readers who would simply read the book and say, "Oh, I really enjoyed the book. I really liked it, and this is good." I had other readers, two of them in particular, who were professionals. One of them was in advertising, and one of them taught business writing at American University. And they would be more specific. They would say, you know, you need to enhance this. You need to uh, focus on this. This part is really good, you know, and they would give me really good feedback. And then the second thing that I needed, I have a little bit of dyslexia. I'm a terrible speller, and I forget commas and
You and me both.
absent-minded. The whole absent-minded thing with Kitty was right there in front of me the whole time. And so I had to fortunately my wife Dot is a very good copy editor. So you really need editors. You really need people to help you get the book in proper shape. And I went through, I had sample copies of the book. I have a stack about that high of sample copies of the book before I got it right from Blurb. So, and, you know, it wasn't an exorbitant amount of money, but I don't think there's still a Bible lover on earth thinks they'll ever make a book on money on a book they wrote about Mayor Bible. You know, it's always a labor of love. So, and then I bought packaging materials so I could send out copies of the book. I had to work out relationships with mainly with Sherry R. Books, and Sheila Krinsky used to be my boss, so that worked really well. Sheila would not look at the book until it was finished. She's a very smart business lady. And Churchlight Books, a Sufi book outlet, and I think the Southern California Bible Group is going to start carrying the book. So I had to work out relationships with distributors of the book and the pricing and the most advantageous thing for them and worked for me was to put the books on consignment so that they don't require as much profit as they would if they had to purchase the books themselves.
Mhm.
And, so there was a lot of rigor to it. I had actually before it was over with, I had three photo editors work on the book, three experts in
Nice.
Photoshop. Um, and one of them, Ann Barker knows about this. One of them, I naively sent him a PDF of the book to help him get the context of stuff. And without my knowing it, he printed the book to make money on it himself really cheaply.
No.
And Anne, who scours the internet for this kind of thing, uh,
Oh, oh
Barbara,
my gosh.
yeah, t- told Barbara Rickstad about it, who read the book, who sent me an email saying, "I love your book," and I hadn't even announced it to the world yet. So, fortunately, I was able. It was on Amazon. I would check all the book, got a list of all the people that publish books, and uh, you know, not Barnes and Nobles and a number of smaller publishers, and you know, told them not to print the book anymore. But I did reach out to the printer who printed the book and said that that person doesn't have a copyright to that book, and then they because it was a print on demand thing. You order the book and then it gets printed in mail by the printer, and so they stopped printing it. So it kind
Mhm.
of stopped that in its track. So it's gets to be kind of serious business a little bit. You have to be careful at every step. But if it's going to turn out right, and you've never done it before, I'm sure you know Kathy and Dot have their stories too. It's not an open and shut case. If Sherry R. Books wants to print your book, then you're in good hands, kind of from soup to nuts, I think, because they really know what they're doing. So,
Yes, they do. My goodness.
yeah.
Ooh. Oh, from one fellow dyslexic to another. What, tell me a bit about your writing process. What was your favorite part? And then I have an idea of the answer, but I'll ask anyway. What was your least favorite? part about
I,
the writing?
I think I've covered the least favorite, just the housekeeping part of it, the getting the permissions. I made sure I got permissions on everything that might have been owned by someone else and all the correspondence. And sometimes you had to work out details about permissions and getting the editing right and thinking, oh God, and I got to get another sample book printed because somebody found something that's unacceptable. And all of that housekeeping work was, I knew I had to do it, but it was not fun.
Yeah.
I think the part that I really enjoyed, I had a time, I'd get up at really early in the morning and I would have a couple of hours most days to work on it. And there was always something that didn't have words that was kind of here in my heart that I wanted to give words to. And when I got focused on the book, kind of words would start to come. And so I would, as soon as I got an idea of usually at the level of a paragraph, I would write it out as quickly as I could. I wouldn't worry about grammar or spell checking or anything. I would just get the idea on paper. And then the real fun was getting it into shape. And I would do things like I would of course clean up the grammar and the spelling and that sort of thing. Sometimes I would find sections of it that I really liked that really didn't move the story along. And one writing coach told me once, you have to be able to kill your darlings. I had to take
I've heard that before, yeah.
a whole paragraph out and just throw it away because even though I thought it was clever and it might have been good writing, it wasn't really helping the reader
Mm.
get where they were hopefully by then wanting to go. uh, I would sometimes find two sentences that could be combined into one, and to compress it that way. And I would go through and look for words that I had used to kind of add emphasis that were kind of uh, shortcuts, you might say. The word, every time I come across the word very, I think, well, I think it's might be very, but does the reader think it's very? So the idea of, for example, I was very tired when I got to the top of the mountain, and I thought, well, I got to take that very out, and I could say I was panting and red at the face in the face when I got to the top of the mountain. Now, a mountain climber or a football coach might think, good, Another person might think I was very tired. So anything you can do that really lets the reader participate in the interpretation. And sometimes I think that the book should be a little bit like stepping stones across a stream, where the reader, some things are a little ambiguous. You can go this way, you can go that way, and let the reader fill in what they think it means, and there are lots of opportunities for that. Um, and sometimes that process, I would work on a paragraph for several days, and then for several days after that, I would think, oh no, this is a better word, and I would sometimes fill out and send myself an email with wording that had come to me kind of on the spot. So it was for me a very pleasurable process. But I think every writer has their own process. I wouldn't. Um, it's like one time a person said to the artist Matisse, he says, "I would love to have your sense of color." And Matisse said very kindly to that person, "Well, I hope you find your own sense of color." So it's really an individual process, and I'm not trying to prescribe anything here, but that's what I enjoy the most.
Yeah. Well, your enjoyment of the writing process really does come through. It makes it more enjoyable to read because I
Well,
can tell how much love and how much fun you had writing it. So it
you
made it
know,
more fun for me to read.
a writing coach friend of mine, actually, she was a a speaking coach. She said, people are going to respond when you write from your heart, when you're
Mm.
writing from your own self. People will that's what people want to hear, and that's what they will respond to, and that's how they'll see themselves in what you write.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely correct. So, how did you choose the title for your book? Because it's very creative and intriguing. And what does young love mean to you as the author?
Well, that has really involved, but the simple answer is like the honeymoon versus the marriage. I mean, that's kind of the simple answer to it. And I definitely wanted to get across the fact that that was a time of, springtime and blossoming young love for everybody, So I thought it really captured that I think somebody, Osmond, wrote a song about young love, first love, filled with deep emotion and that kind of thing. And it was uh, so it just seemed like I'm really happy that that title came to me. And then the subtitle is Stories of Learning from Darwin, Kitty, Elizabeth, Jane, and My Father, which is, at first it was memories, but then I thought, well, nobody's interested in my memories, but they might be interested in how I learned, and so I changed the title to Stories of Learning.
All right. I really like it. I really do. So, you found out about Mir Baba very young, which is incredibly fortunate. So, tell us a little bit about how that happened and what it was like for you, especially because I know based on your book that you were raised Baptist.
Yes,
And as someone who was also raised Baptist in the South, I
yes.
am very, very fascinated about this answer.
Well, I was very fortunate to be the prodigal son. I'm the one that ran away to the foreign land and actually found my home was in that foreign land. So I guess I was lucky in that way. But I um, and this is covered pretty pretty well in the book because I feel like I'm kind of the straight man in the book, that this is a book about other people, but they need something to reference a story to. So
Mhm.
my Bob's story kind of threads through that book. Uh, but in about 1970, I was just as I graduated from college. A really good friend of mine just suggested, why don't you just go to some place where nobody knows you? And because that person knew how much I was under the spell of my prominent family and just get away from them completely. So I went to California. I ended up settling in Berkeley. Um, and one day I came home from work and I just had this strong, strong feeling that there was something very major that was missing in my life. And if I kept trying to please my parents, I would never find it. And I would find it among the hippies. So I basically became what they call a hippie. And it was there that I first heard about Mayor Baba. And he was kind of he was the neighborhood deity. People like the don't worry, be happy pictures and that sort of thing. I was a little leery because he didn't want you to take drugs, but I liked him anyway. And a friend of mine who was a housemaid in my commune came home one day with a poster of Mayor Baba and a copy of God Speaks. Baba poster of God Speaks in the other hand, and said to me, he looked at me, he was a yogi, and he looked at me and he said, Owen, Meher Baba is God. And then he went into a trance. And at that moment, God really became a life hypothesis for me. And after about 3 months of this, I can't say it wasn't a wonderful experience, a really happy, totally self-indulgent experience. Everything just went downhill completely. And when that happened, I was pretty much at rock bottom and I was pretty much desperate. Um, but anyway, I got interested in Mayor Baba, and then it just so happened that Darwin Shaw was in town, just by coincidence. And so had Mayorstown, which was a Baba Center there, a few blocks from where I lived. And he came and talked. And I remember during the question and answer period, I had long hair and patch clothes and the whole regalia, you might say. And I stood up and I said, "Well, that all sounds really good for you, but I don't experience anything like that." I thought I'd really thrown him a hardball, but he thought it was a nice question, and he said, "Well, you have to be like you're in a coal mine that collapsed, and you have to just start picking, and you have to pick and pick, and you have to pick away until you see the light." And I didn't have anything else to do, so I started picking. And I've been picking ever since, seeing more and more light. And then I ended up in Schenectady. I was invited to go there by Ken Rickstad and Jeff Wolverton, who I met in India. Kitty suggested right away that I go to India. And they invited me to move to Albany. And that's when I joined the very fortunate few people, including Bobby Bernstein and Ken and Barbara Rickstad and Jeff Overton and Benny Moore and several other people, in Darwin's little wonderful little circle there. Yeah.
Oh, a lot of coincidences. Those aren't really real, are they?
People don't notice the coincidences. There's this joke about the person who was trying to find a parking spot, desperately looking for a parking spot, or they wouldn't get to a job interview. And he said, "God, if you would just find me a parking spot, I will love you forever." And all of a sudden, a car pulled out right in front and left a beautiful space. And he said, "Never mind, I just found one." People don't recognize the coincidences when they come along. And I didn't until I wrote the book and I looked back. The timing was pretty amazing, pretty
Yeah.
divine. So,
Hindsight is 2020 and all that.
yeah.
So, can you describe what Mayhair Center was like in the early days for all of those here,
Sure.
especially me, who weren't
Uh,
able to be there? And what was the Baba community like then in that area?
Well, I you know, I think the Mayor Center and the community at large are kind of so intertwined. I'll probably end up describing both of them at the same time, but um, um, it was everybody. It was in the background. In the background was the Vietnam War, the protests. There was AIDS in the background. There was all of this happening, but for us, it was definitely far in the background. We were all so excited to know about Mayor Baba, and it was just to have Kitty there. If you ever had a question, you could just go to her. We had our own private monthly member, and there was a lot. We were all at the age where people get married, and um, so there was romance in the air, and Kitty would help guide us through all that. The image there is a wedding. That's Ken and Barbara's wedding in the back, and in my backyard, and you can see Elizabeth and Kitty and Jane and I think Darwin and Jean are there. You can't see them too well, and the backs are Jeff Wolverton and Denny Moore. So um, and that was at their wedding, and we did a little skit, um, and Lynn Ott was in the skit, and it was just so amazing. But it was also agonizing. I mean, it was also very difficult. And in the sense that your emotions were heightened, and so Kitty was helping everybody through their failed romances or unrequited love, and so that was very much a part of it. I worked for Sherry R. Press, which was all these enthusiastic people working in a tiny little print shop that eventually really prospered. And there were visitors from India. We would go to the ocean and go swimming. We would go to these uh, seafood restaurants in Myrtle Beach, and they're in the off season, when the prices aren't so high. Um, and I don't know if I've just done that good a job of describing it, but it was a really wonderful time. On Friday night, Jim Meyer and Bob Brown would do a concert, and everybody would gather in their refectory, and and they would sing, and Bob Brown, I really miss him. He was just wonderful soul. He had so much enthusiasm, um, and we loved his songs. We would sing his songs. And Jim Meyer wrote some beautiful songs, and he made an album that was can't remember the name of that first album he made, but everybody was so excited. This was like the first Bob album, ever. And, it was made in America. And they went to a recording studio and they gathered some good musicians, and Doug Dickey was his producer, and I remember I was living with either Jim or Doug at the time. We moved from one place to the other all the time, and they were listening to the recording. And I was walking into my own house, and they told me I had to leave because this was so important. It was it was all it was all it just really, really wow. And it was young. It was definitely young love.
Mhm.
This is not master and servitude kind of love. This was like just being excited and trying to get your feet on the ground kind of love. So does that answer the question pretty well? Or?
Yes, I think you mentioned though that you had a really, really sweet story about Sheila and Elizabeth.
Yes, yes. I'm glad you reminded me about that. Um, I think, when in India, we would talk to the Mandalay and they would, just about every time they talked, they say, well, Baba said it, so he had to obey, and we would all sit there and say, we want to obey. We want to know how to obey, and not really knowing what it meant. We were in like this nice, comfortable place, and somebody else was doing the obeying, not us. And so we went to uh, uh, Sheila and I were driving over to Del Ruba to meet with Elizabeth about God to Man and Man to God, which is a book of discourses that Sharia Press was publishing. And she said, "Oh, and she had a mock-up of the book. She said, "Oh, and this is just a mock-up. It's just a black and white mock-up. There's nothing special about it, but this is the basic idea I want to work from, and I want to show the picture to Elizabeth and see if she approves of the picture and the basic idea. But what I really want to do is I want to have this idea about color and I have this idea about she's so good with Photoshop and that kind of thing. Although Photoshop didn't exist in that day, for sure. And so we went into, and I was there, and she showed the book to Elizabeth, and she didn't say anything to Elizabeth about her excited ideas or anything. And she showed the book to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth said, you know, I really like that book, exactly the way it is. And I thought, and, and Sheila said, okay. And not a peep from her about all her, they were gone in an instant. And I thought, if Elizabeth had said that to me, I would have said, well, Elizabeth, you don't know what I think, but Sheila just said, yes, okay. Because Baba had asked her to get everything approved by um, she had some choices, but the choice she chose was Kitty and Elizabeth. And and that was really amazing. Her self-control about that was really fabulous. So,
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Oh, I love that photo of Elizabeth that you chose for your book.
thank you. Oh, by the
And
way, just I probably should correct it a little bit. The the picture of Kitty actually came from Sufism. I think you had Ralph Jackson, but it really came from Sufism. So
Okay.
We don't
I
need a picture, but
apologize.
I just thought if it's published, it might be good
Okay.
to clear.
Yeah, I thought I had copied it from the the photo credits.
Not a problem.
All right. Yeah. I love your description of the center in those early days because it calls to mind the image of an oasis in the desert. You
Mhm.
know, this place where there's so much love and happiness and surrounded by this turbulent, crazy world.
Yeah. Well, it was pretty turbulent, but it was definitely happy, and we were, um, um, you know, we just thought we were, and, I just was still pinching myself. Why did I get chosen of all people? But it was just wonderful. Yeah. Mhm. But not that I would want to go back to it. Let me say that it was, I mean, I was mad at people all the time, and I couldn't keep my emotions really under control, and I was sometimes disruptive, and it wasn't supposed to be permanent. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have done Bob a bit of good if I'd stayed that way. And so,
Um, so in your book, you talk a bit about being involved with Happy Club and community volunteer services. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
yeah. Um, when the two key people for starting Happy Club were Wendy and Jane. I think I have a picture of them together. Wendy is Jane's daughter, and uh, Elizabeth's maid uh, was Bessie. Was Elizabeth was giving Bessie a ride home from work, and Wendy was in the car, and Bessie's grandchildren were playing in the street. And Wendy said, um, why don't you let the children come and play at the center? And Elizabeth thought that was a good idea. And so that's really how Happy Club started. And Mayor Baba knew about it and gave it his blessing. And so, and then Jane really, it all sort of centered around Jane when Wendy went to college and really needed an adult to oversee it. Um, and the I was one of the drivers, so I would go and there are two poor communities in Murray that we served, as well as some people in outlying areas, and there were a couple of families that Mayor Bob had specifically mentioned, and they always were invited to come to Happy Club, and I had a station wagon, so I could fit 8 children into the car, and I would pull into this desperately poor housing, cinder block housing project, and it was a big vacant, dusty vacant lot in front. And about 20 kids would swarm around the car. Young children, the oldest ones were maybe 10 or 12, and the youngest ones were first or second graders. And they all, really wanted to come. I could only take 8. And there were a few children that got to come all the time. And so I just had to pick, I kind of remembered who had come and who hadn't come and how recently they'd come. But there was no formal organization. There was no church. There was no other structure. It was just between me and those kids. And then we would go to the center, and there would always be a crafts project, and then peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and then and apple juice, and we would take them home, and cookies, I think, and we would take them home. And the children, they just loved it. In the summer, we would go to the beach, and the children were so excited, and they just loved it. And I have friends to this day, who were in Happy Club, and it's like the racial barriers were really kind of overcome. They weren't there anymore. And which kind of leads into a little bit about Jane. Um, Jane, um, she wasn't like Kitty and Elizabeth, who were very self-contained and always under control. Jane was all out there with her emotions, and she there was a woman who lived in that little cinder block place who was desperately poor. She had several children. She lived on meager welfare. She had no partner. She was, I think, mentally ill. And Jane talked about her like, I mean, totally. I'm not talking about pretending, like she was her dear friend, and she was just uh, she had an incredibly generous heart. I hope she's given a little bit more emphasis in the future because uh, there was no stopping her love. And she would definitely go overboard. I mean, once I was in a conversation with her and another young woman who was a friend of mine, and she thought we'd make a good couple. So she just reached out and pushed us together. We were both like, what? No way, but the message was for her, it was full of love. You need the two of you would profit from a companion in life. It was pushy, but it was full of love. And it's just one of the most remarkable of Mayor Baba's disciples. And she had this beautiful Southern accent. And so that's, and she was kind of the mother of Happy Club. And there's a picture of her on the cover of the book with some of the Happy Club children. Um, so um, let's see. I don't know if there's more I could say about Happy Club, but I could switch over to community volunteer services now. Uh, but that's quite a story in itself.
Yeah.
It really started with a, a high school organization that Charles Haynes was one of the founders of that organization, and it was a similar name like community something, service something. Um, and it was like the schools, when Charles was in high school in Myrtle Beach was integrated for the first time. And he and some of the African American friends and other people, I think Wendy might have been in high school at the time and was involved in it, wanted to form this service group. And the principal of the school said it would be disruptive that they couldn't meet at the school. He was the editor of the school paper, but he couldn't mention it in the school paper. But they started, and they would uh, do things like paint a house. They built a playground, and they would do things like that. And then when Charles went off to college, it was uh, incorporated, and Jane Elizabeth, of course, was behind the scenes, but Jane, got it all organized, and I was uh, invited to be the treasurer of. And I remember when they announced it, they said we want to give younger people a chance to grow or something. Well, but anyway, I was the treasurer of the organization, and I remember when Mary Clayton came to town. We had a flea market. Once a year, we would have a flea market and raise about $3,000, which was in today's money, maybe $10,000. But that was all that we had. And we would, help with a medical bill or patch a roof or something like that with our little meager budget. And the flea market was all the churches, black and white, were there together. And it didn't seem to occur to anybody that this is integrated. Everybody just happily joined in, for as far as I know, which was pretty much of a miracle in the Deep South in the early 70s. But when Mary came to town, she had a proposal. We had a board meeting, and she came and she said that she wanted a salary or a grant, she called it, of $50 a week to live on in order to start a federally funded daycare center in 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 the Race Path community, that poor community in Myrtle Beach, and and um, and I was sitting there. I didn't know Mary from anybody, and I was a treasurer, and I was young, and I thought, man, this is too much. We can't afford something like this. This is just like way too much, I mean, and I was pretty skeptical, and then Jane, her typical self, she just joined the fray, She disagreed with somebody, you knew it, and I mean, she was always kind, but she was very out there with her feelings about stuff, and then there were the people from the churches who were there, and they were a little more reserved than us recovering hippies who were the officers and stuff. And then there were members of the community. And there was this big discussion, and nothing seemed to be happening. Um, and I just thought it's going to take us far beyond, what we've ever done before. And Elizabeth was sitting there, and she was so calm. She I mean, she might have said a few words, but she definitely did not join the argument, the discussion. And finally, I guess it might have been 11 o'clock at night, everybody just was exhausted. And then all at once, we just all turned and faced Elizabeth and said, "What do you think?" And Elizabeth said, "Oh, I think we should give Mary a 100% full support." And that resolved it just like that, and I was so relieved. I was so happy. Everybody was so happy, and we just moved ahead, and we really took off from there. And there were lots of adventures. I don't think I can recount. I don't think I have time to recount them all, but there were all kinds of adventures in getting that to happen. So, and they're in the book, but it kind of takes off from there, you might say. So,
Sounds like y'all were busy, busy, busy. My goodness.
well, it was a lot of fun, that's for sure.
So, our next question. Oh, been excited to ask you about this one. So, talk about Darwin and Gene Shaw, obviously, in this book.
Yeah,
How did you meet them? I know that you mentioned a
right.
little bit about Darwin, but can you tell us more about that and some
Well,
of your memories
met him at their
about them?
meeting. Yeah, I'm looking at the time here on my, I hope we're not going to go too long. It's close to
No,
the end.
we're right on time. You are doing a great job. Thank
Okay,
you.
okay. Well, of course, I met them. I met Gene probably at Darwin's house, 2 Castine Street. And Ken Rickstead did a CD of songs about his experiences with Don. And then one of the songs is 2 Castine Street, which really captures how much fun it was to be there. Uh, they were they were happy people, They, every meeting that we had was focused on Mayor Baba, and it was always lighthearted, and it would never occur to anybody to talk about politics or to gripe or anything like that. And if they did, it was like this energy would come from Darwin that would stop it in a second. And we would have in the springtime we would have picnics and we would he would typically he would read a discourse and kind of comment on that, and we might have a film, and Bobby Bernstein or Jane Turner were musicians, and they would do some music afterwards, and we would have cookies and apple juice afterwards that Gene would serve. I think I think I can answer what it was like to be with him very, very quickly by saying, and maybe you can put this in the notes on YouTube. There are lots of very, very good uh, videos of Darwin speaking, but there's one where Darwin speaks and Gene speaks, and it's a very lighthearted, happy time, and the person taking the videos really knew what he was doing, and it's really really is a lovely thing. And I would recommend anybody who wants to feel what it feels like to be with Darwin and Gene to watch that kind of a video. They're on YouTube and they're not hard to find. So,
All right. I know it can't do them justice, but it's the closest some of us, like myself, the youngsters in the crowd, are going to get, as they were quite special people. Alrighty. So, in the subtitle of your book, Stories of Learning from Darwin, Kitty, Elizabeth, Jane, and My Father, can you tell us a little bit more about Owen Cooper Sr. and his frankly amazing contributions to helping the Mayor Center out of an incredibly tight spot?
well, it's got to be one of my favorite stories because, uh, I grew up in the Baptist church. I think you did too. And we don't have to think very hard to know that there are an awful lot of evangelicals that the media is not interested in because they are true to the gospel. They understand Christian love and they're not full of anger and they're not consumed by politics. And so this is a story about one of those people. And I'm so happy that I was encouraged to tell it. And I'm so happy that I realized that it's a big story and I need to give the reader a sense of what that man was like and what made him do that. But in a nutshell, he uh, I got a call from John Leiter, and he told me uh, that the Bible Center was in danger of losing its uh, tax exempt status. And of course, this is probably the most. It's got to be some of the most expensive undeveloped real estate in Myrtle Beach, if not the United States or the world, even. It's very this kind of undeveloped property in the heart of the most visited to move to center in in the United States. That's and the taxes on the property would have been astronomical, and the center would have had to close. I mean, they wouldn't have been able to stay open, and it would have stopped it. And so I asked my father if he would. They asked me if I would ask my father. I asked him, and he said, "Yes, I'm going to be in a meeting in New Orleans. I can fly up for one day, testify, and come back." And so that's what he did. And during the testimony, uh, he talked about he basically said, "My son Owen seemed to be lost. He was wandering in the wilderness," as he said, and then because of the center, when he got involved with the center, it turned his life around, and that it was an authentic spiritual conversion. So, and Charles Haynes, who was the main representative for the center at that hearings, told me that that's the moment that it turned around, because this was just three businessmen. They were probably Protestants themselves. They could have all been Baptist or whatever. And my father's very prominent. He was known. He was the vice president of the Baptist World Alliance, which has 47 million members, and he was president of the Southern Baptist Convention, which meant that he was the head of all the Southern Baptists in the United States. He was their spokesman for 2 years. So he was very well known and actually known to the board members before the hearing. Uh, and so he basically came to the rescue, and succeeded. And so the book covers that, but it also covers what kind of a person he was, and I wanted to read a little excerpt to kind of give a little sense of the humanness of a Southern Baptist and uh, what it's like on a day-to-day basis to be a Southern Baptist. And I talk about my writing process, and I come across an idea that I really like. This is definitely one of my favorites in the whole book. It's the beginning of a chapter called My Father's Faith. My father loved being a Baptist. He loved the familiar hymns, the watermelon picnics in July, dressing up for Sunday service, coffee and donuts after an early morning revival meeting, the holy atmosphere of baptism and the Lord's Supper. He loved his pastor. His wife joined him fully in this. They loved to comment on the lessons in the sermon as we drove home from church for a midday dinner of fried chicken with rice and gravy, greens, homemade yeast rolls, homemade lemon meringue pie. I caught a glimpse of his private communion with God when, as a boy, I passed by my parents' room at bedtime. I felt the perfume presence as they knelt together beside the bed in prayer. So hopefully that gives a sense of, there are genuine Christians out there, that are able to help, that can be, and maybe not the way my father was, but certainly are attuned to Baba's manifestations, and they don't get into the press. They're not controversial. They don't take hard stands. They look at and I'm sure anybody who's grew up in that church who's a Bible lover can remember people like that. So that's really what I wanted to um, convey about my father, and I think
Mhm.
hopefully I did a pretty good job of doing that. I certainly wanted to, and it was helpful to me. I mean, the exercise. There was a time in my life when I could have written something just as negative about my father, I suppose, but it really wouldn't have been from my heart. And but at the end of it, he kind of stopped being my father and started being my friend. It was interesting that way, that it was very helpful to me with regard to my father and my mother. It really got me. When I wrote the book, I'm kind of the age my father was when this happened. So it's kind of sometimes it takes most of your life to come to terms with your parents. But it was a wonderful personal experience. So,
Yeah. I can say that you definitely, at least for me, as someone who grew up as a Southern Baptist, that quote especially just gives me chills. You
right,
captured that kind of person so
right,
well.
right,
It really is. It almost makes me get emotional because that's men in my family. I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah.
You
Thank
really
you.
have such a way with words.
Um,
Oh, and now for our last question, which I know is going to make me get very emotional. Can you tell us a little bit about your last meeting with Darwin? Because it really is something very, very beautiful, and I want everyone here to hear this memory.
well, it was really in a way, the culmination of the book. And if I do a different edition, I'll probably add this as a second little letter to my friend at the end. Um, Darwin was in his late 90s, and he invited me to have dinner with him, which I heard was kind of an unusual thing for him to do that. And I know his friend Summer, who sort of helped take care of him, this lovely young woman, and Darwin and myself, and there might have been one or two other people there, maybe Jeff or somebody. And and we were talking and chatting. Darwin was kind of quiet. It wasn't lively or anything. And kind of in the middle of the conversation, he said to me, uh, Jean died. And I felt really on the spot and a little embarrassed that I hadn't said to him. I said something to him about it. I get a little emotional too when I tell the story. Said to acknowledge that, and and what and that was really just that one little moment was a real turning point for me in my understanding of the whole theme of this idea of not being included and why couldn't I be there and that sort of thing. Because I think that's universal. I think even Monty wrote a song about "I long to long for you." Baba's sister had that same sense of longing and not being able to fully participate. And of course, Darwin uh, was raising a family in the United States, and he was the closest of Mayor Baba's disciples who didn't have a chance to live with him in India over an extended period of time. And he talked about how he longed to be with Baba and how happy he was when they were finally invited to come to I think it was the East-West gathering, and how delightful that was and how his longing had been fulfilled. And now this is a good example of why young love is not really mature love, because I would sit there and I would think, boy, I bet that guy's sorry he got married. You know, if he wasn't raised in a family, if he hadn't gotten married, he would have been able to be there with Baba. I bet he really is sorry about that. And then when he said that about Jean passing away, it wiped all that out in less than an instant. That I understood that his family life, his life with his family, was extraordinarily meaningful. It was it was exactly where he could learn the best, and and so that really helped me understand probably maybe the best answer to that woman's question is, you're right where you're supposed to be, and uh, so that's my last encounter with Darwin. And I wanted to, if you don't mind, I'd like to, since we're kind of winding up here, I have a poem that I'd like to read. It's really a song lyric. It was written by Hank Menlin. And in this experience of why wasn't I included? Why am I being left out? Oh gosh, I wish I could have been there, is kind of certainly a theme in everybody's life. And it would occur to me sometimes when things would be happening that I would want to be a part of, and I wasn't invited to be a part of. And and this song really gave me comfort, and it really helped me resolve it. So if I can read it without getting too choked up, I'll at least give it a try. Um, I see his face in 1,000 faces. I see his light in 1,000 eyes. Every soul his love embraces shines within in beauty wise. Every heart holds his reflection. In his image it was formed. Every path leads to his perfection. Since the dawn of first made most morn. Never think of changing places with another on life's way. For our Lord has 1,000 graces. You're one step closer every day. You are his. You know his secret. You know where the pearl really lies. You can find him in 1,000 faces. I can see him in your eyes.
No. On that incredibly moving and sweet note, um, I will put my Barbara Walters hat down and open the floor for anyone in the audience who wants to ask our incredible, wonderful author here questions or has any comments. You can all unmute now if you want, but you don't have to.
I think Kat was
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
I'm not sure I know who's talking.
That's Kathy here.
Oh, okay. I think I have to take the spotlight off of myself. Okay. Like Kathy.
Um, I will get to Ken in 1 second. Anne asked a question in the chat. What was the name of that song, Owen?
Oh, A Thousand Faces.
Thousand Faces.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Ken?
Hi, Owen. I don't know if we've ever actually met, but I can't believe I can't even tell the story about not being able to tell the story. Your story, your dad's story. I heard it from Charles Haynes a long time ago, more than once. And through the decades of 2011 through 2018 or so, I was doing center tours. And once in a while, people would ask me, I would share things with new people. And the story of your dad saving the center, the way Charles told it, the way I remembered it, was so powerful that I could never even get through it really. And I'm sure it touched a lot of people.
Mhm.
So I just want you to know that
Mm.
how meaningful and
Thank
crucial your
you.
father was in that period.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really,
Charles has a lot of really touching details and in his telling as I remember it. So thank you.
yeah, I think that there's a lot about it. So maybe a third of the book or something is about just my father and his makeup. And so thank you, Ken, very much.
Mm.
So Kathy,
Could you just remind us how many people were in that room when that tremendous decision was made? And what year was it, please?
um, it's in the book. I think it was 1982 or something. I can try to look
I
it
have the book right here.
up.
Let me see if I can. Ooh.
Mm.
Uh,
Because, yeah.
it was 1982 that it was the tax commission
Yeah.
was challenging it.
Mhm.
I can probably fill in the details from there, um, Claire. Um, I'm glad you asked that question, Kathy, because that really is important to kind of have a picture of it. And there's more uh, detail about it in the book. There were three members of the commission. I tried to find their names, but I wasn't able to do that. And then Charles was there. And there were three people who testified in that vein about, and one of them was Reverend DuBose, who was Elizabeth's longtime pastor, who had visited the center a number of times and had very moving things to say. And the other one was Bishop Harmon, who was Joe Harmon's father. Now, Bishop Harmon was in his 90s. He was in the audience, but he didn't testify. And there were, of course, engineers and land surveyors and that all that kind of housekeeping work about framing the issues and that sort of thing was all there, but it certainly didn't have the tone of a Supreme Court hearing or something. It was kind of an informal hearing. And I don't know how many people were in the room. I'm not sure Charles would be able to answer that question, but I'm just not sure. Yeah.
So the men who made that decision were basically these three
Yes,
people.
there were three prominent citizens of South Carolina who I think could see themselves in all three of those people. They could see themselves in a Methodist ministry. I mean, even if they were Jewish, they could still from the South, and they could see themselves in in my father, and then and the Methodist bishop. So
Mm. I just happened to be at Dilbruba. My strong memory is opening up a bottle of something celebratory that was not usually drunk at Dilbruba when the news came.
oh, really?
And Elizabeth and Jane and Kitty, let's see, no, 80, of course, 82, Elizabeth was gone. So Kitty and Jane. And I don't really know who else was there celebrating, lifting a glass to your dad and to Mayor Baba and the commissioners, whoever were making the decision.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing moment, and I think that they were basically, and I'm in a very real sense, welcoming Mayor Baba into the faith community of South Carolina. You're one of us,
Mm.
pretty important thing.
Mm. Wow. Did you ever have any chance to meet those men later? I mean, I suppose that wouldn't have been something you would have done.
No, and no, and I didn't. I don't think I would. I think I tried to look up their names, but I wasn't able to find them because I really wanted to know. I wanted to know whether they were, Christians or Jewish or Baptists or Episcopalians. If I'd known those details, I would have included them, if not their names. But um, and another thing about the writing process that just occurred to me, I took the transcript uh, and transcribed it, and I put blocks of that transcript into the draft. And one of my editors, who was a professional, had been in the advertising business for decades, said, "Owen, you've got to work those quotes into the narrative. You can't just throw a block of text up there. Your readers aren't going to like that." So I had to go back. I didn't want to do that. That was hard work, but he said I had to. So
You did a great job.
thank you.
I just to say another thank you to your dad and Mayor Baba is that, and the commission, the decision makers, all of us who walk the beach, of course, visit the center, but millions of people every year who walk the beach from the Briarcliff Acres through the center to Land's End and the unobstructed beach, and the sea turtles are thankful, and
Well, I'm glad he was a pinch hitter at the right time. That's for sure. And I'm sure that that one moment was crucial. And sometimes I wonder if that was the reason I was born into that family, to kind of help make that connection. Who knows? Because it was pretty important. It was important to my father, So I think if any, you don't have to buy the books. It's not cheap because it took a lot to print it. But if you can borrow the book or whatever, I think that the the story of his life is a great counterpoint to what you see on TV and hear in the media and read about evangelicals. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm. What a blessed gift you have been given this lifetime.
Well, I can't deny that. You can say the same thing, Kathy.
Oh, all of us here. Hmm.
I remember those days when you would pull out your guitar and
Yeah,
uh,
I can't remember if I was singing at
you were singing.
at
I
the
just
wedding with
remember you
Bob, or it was
singing.
Jane.
Yeah, I don't know. I just remember you singing. I remember Bobby Bernstein. And when my daughter got married to a Bible lover, Bobby was our musical performer. You know, she bought her keyboard and made it a lively party. So
May I
Yes.
may I say something? I wanted to
sure.
this Ed?
Yeah.
Yeah, Owen, well, first I want to say I really feel that your after hearing you today, definitely you're your father's son. Absolutely. You know, your heart quality and your can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Um, and I'm inspired to read the book again. I'm totally inspired. It'll be really wonderful after hearing some of this background. And I just want to say I had no idea, you know, like you showed up at a meeting. I ended up inheriting Ken Lux's meeting. He went off to Maine. I was this baby Bible lover, like a year into it, and the meetings were at my house. I remember you showing up in your truck and your flannel shirt, and like just this guy, you know, it's a Southern guy. I don't know how you showed up, and very cheerful. And I had no idea of your background. And I think you'd been to the center already. I think that was after you had.
I went from India straight to Schenectady, and I got a job
Oh,
working on a farm, which had to do with my father because my father grew up on a dairy farm, and I got a job working on a dairy farm to sort of get. It was part of my trying to come to terms with this. He was a very nice man. If you read the book, you'll know
oh, I have.
he was a very nice man, but he wasn't an easy person to have for a father. And I might be my father's son in some ways, but I'm not the executive type. I'm more the artistic type.
Uh,
But
no, I did read it, enjoyed it, but now I think I'm even more so. I'm
yeah,
gonna, you know, after your this wonderful talk.
thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my. I'm glad it. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. I certainly hope that you will.
Beautiful talk.
Thank,
Beautiful. So
thank you.
yeah, these two of people here that are at the house are finding tissues. It's so emotional there. Yeah, beautiful.
I haven't been able to get through that story without choking up yet, So, uh, yeah.
Well, that's good.
Okay.
Uh, Catherine, did you raise your hand for a question? Or, oh, you're muted.
Were you talking to me?
Yes, I thought I saw you raising your hand. Do you have another question or comment? Or,
I think just having loved Owen, loving your book and your stories, which brought back so many memories, and Dot, of course, loving your amazing book, It's You. I I feel emboldened to ask everybody here who has connections with these amazing people to please write the stories down. So many people came to me and told me stories about their own personal stories about Elizabeth, Kitty, Margaret, Jane. And I just kept saying after Dilruba Days came out, please write the stories down. Just, like an archival person would feel the same way. These are such treasures that so many generations will raise a long time ago. I just, oh my golly, just because I had such fondness for those three amazing ladies at Dilruba. Oh, and do you have either an Elizabeth or a Kitty story one more that you could share from your book?
Well, let's see. Um, probably so. Let me. Um, Well, I I know that Elizabeth, and this is Elizabeth was an amazing storyteller. I think that it's really too bad that she was kind of camera shy and there are not a lot of recordings. And I think the only good one that I've ever seen was when Alan Cohen interviewed her, but she was very old at the time. Um, but but she could. I remember there was a young fella who I met as a customer or something, and he knew about the center, and he was so excited to meet Elizabeth. And what should I wear? How should I dress? Because I knew him as a business customer, and and Elizabeth just took him in hand and made him feel so. She had such grace, and she never got. I mean, if you stopped and thought about it, you knew she must have been a very well brought up person, but she never, she never, except for a string of pearls, I don't think I ever saw her show off any wealth at all, ever. She just had a Chevrolet car, a simple little house, and and she loved business. I mean, I was thinking about buying a lot at Briarcliff at one time when they weren't so exorbitant. And she was so interested in this. She wanted me to know about the drainage and she wanted me to know about the neighbors. And she would talk about, she kind of liked everybody. She once told me, there's something you can learn from everybody. And so he was an airline pilot and he's retired and I never met the person, but I think she would just find something positive in just about everybody, unless, of course, they try to take advantage of her, and then you could find out how tough she could really be. But she was more for workers. If you had a close relationship uh, with Jane, except for Wendy and Charles, who were like her grandchildren, uh, if you had a close relationship with her, you were working for community volunteer services or you were on the center staff or something like that. Uh, it's funny that you would uh, go to her. I don't know how much time we've got. I think we're supposed to be done in an hour and a half, and I'm looking at 10 minutes over, so I don't want to go too far with this, Claire. Um,
Yeah, we can go for a little bit further.
yeah, I think I better leave it. I say it a lot better in the book, and it's a lot better thought through. I'm kind of struggling to come up with something, uh, but I think it's best for me to just uh, encourage you to borrow the book or buy it or whatever, and read the book. It's not long. It's not hard to read. Most people read it in one or two sittings.
No, it is 104 pages, so very manageable, even if you're maybe not the best reader like myself. Alrighty. Well, again, Owen's email is owencooper7@gmail.com. And if you have any questions for me or the archive, you can email me at claire.barrett@mayorarchive.org. Always happy to get feedback from folks. Um, I want to thank everyone again for being here. This has been fantastic. Everyone, just for bringing your energy, for your questions, for your comments, for your stories. This has been even better than what I was hoping for. And Owen, you did a fantastic job. You get an A plus plus.
Mm. Well,
Alrighty. Well, I will release everybody to have
thank,
the rest of your Sunday. Oh, thank you, Bobby. You're so sweet.